and we set up a guy that was going to come and provide us with all the jewelry store for the whole store. We were promising this guy he was going to make a ton of money on us because he was going to be our sole provider of jewelry. And when we got him in that store, we duct taped him to a chair, got into his car, took out all of the car contents, and we took off. And it was huge. It was just huge in terms of yield.
How much would you say you guys made, or even?
The first one, I would say 250 grand. This one was easily 500.
Welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today I'm joined by former jewel thief Bryan Sobolewski. Bryan shares how his father, his brother, and himself robbed over 22 jewelry spots. Bryan points out how they would form a heist and how they would go in and rob the jewelry. The feds ended up pursuing a case against Bryan, his father, and his brother. They all ended up spending a number of years behind prison walls. After Bryan got out of prison, he's been doing a lot of cool things. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this, and enough from me. Let's get into Bryan's story. All right, welcome back everyone to another podcast. I got another good guest on today, Bryan. He has a really great redemption story, and today we're going to get into how he got to where he is today. So thank you, Bryan, so much for coming on my podcast today. How you doing, man?
Thanks for having me on. I'm doing well.
Good, man. I'm glad we were able to make this happen. You got a really good book, and like I was telling you before, I came across you on Insider, and you've done quite a few other opportunities and speaking stuff since then. So, I mean, like we said, you just never know what these doors lead to, man. That's how we came across to each other. But
cool.
Yeah, a little background on you. We could go into your story and stuff. I mean, you were involved with doing jewelry robberies and stuff like that with your family members. Correct. And eventually went to prison to change your life around. So that's what it is in a nutshell. So what was your early life like, man? What was it like growing up?
Wow. I come from a very early on. My parents divorced when I was very, very young. I was probably about 6 or 7 years old when my mother and father decided to call it quits. And it was just a very traditional family. You know, divorce was very difficult. We were a Catholic family. It wasn't really accepted. So we were kind of the black sheep of the neighborhood anyway. My mother had a pretty severe drinking problem. And back then in the 70s, I was born in 1970. So back in the 70s, we had this little house at the end of it was a double dead end street.
Double,
right?
How do you explain
How
that?
Symbolic. It was just, I would say it was like a cul-de-sac, but Sherwood Ave went down and it went down this hill, and then kind of crept up a little bit. And there was a bunch of houses on Sherwood Ave. And then there was another, it branched out into like a Y.
Oh, okay.
And then Glen Road had a dead end there.
And what city did you grow up in?
What's that?
Boston? You grew up in Boston?
I was in Massachusetts. Yeah, okay. I was about 20 minutes outside of Boston in Peabody, Massachusetts. It was an old tanning city. And so many of the factories in downtown Peabody were these huge 4-floor, where they just took in mounds and mounds of leather. They treated it, and then they shipped it out, farther up north to be used as jackets or whatever the hell they do with cowhides. But there's so many movies out there about how that particular part of Boston was poisoned by that industry. I think John Travolta was it was called Class Action or something. Mm-hmm. And the jury awarded like $30 billion to everybody, all the victims, because they absolutely proved that this company dumped all this tanning chemicals into just their water, their drinking water, and everybody got sick and people were dying. But it got held up in court so long that I still don't think it's paid.
Wow,
I mean, we're talking like 30 years ago. Yeah. But I mean, I remember growing up with we had a Eastman Gelatin Kodak was this small company right in Peabody that made disposable film, and one of the byproducts was lime. Like there would just be mounds and mounds and mounds of lime in what we called the lime pits, about 2 or 3 football fields behind my house. Mm-hmm. So everybody on Sherwood Ave and Glen Road had migraines our whole lives. I'm still in contact with some of the people on Facebook, and they're still complaining. Yeah, I get headaches. It was just a chemically place to live, man. That's why I think I'm just one sniff of chemicals away from becoming a supervillain at this point. I can't wait. But I mean, that's what we grew up in. There was a certain point that you would be out playing in the woods and have to stop because you were about to reach, barbed wire and this huge chemical field of byproduct of something we didn't understand then. But now we're like, uh-oh, well, just take that and go dump it in the ocean. I think that's what they do with it now.
Oh,
But
jeez.
again, where I lived, 2 towns over, had the most polluting coal burning plant in the United States, all the way up to the Clinton administration. And Clinton was going to shut it down, but then when he left, Bush turned it back on again, and it burned for like another 25 years. And then I think it's closed now. But you just see that it was an industrial sort of place to live. And we had the docks that came into Boston Harbor. And my dad just remembers large amounts of crime where he grew up. He grew up in Chelsea, which is just outside of East Boston. And East Boston is where the Chelsea Channel is. So they'll take all the stuff that comes in from China up the Chelsea Channel into the East Boston dock. And that's where they'll unload just trailers of stuff from China. And the mob was all over it, because then the mob would steal a bunch of it and then go plant it in places like the Salem Willows, which was a beachfront amusement park. Revere Beach. Anybody that grew up in Boston knows Revere Beach had, it was just a strip of pizza places and ice cream places and places you could do video games. And that's where the mob would just take tons and tons and tons of stuff that you all remember growing up with as a prize, playing skee ball.
Let me ask you something. Was it the Patriarcha family out there then?
No, it was the Angelos.
Angelos? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if they were closely related to the Patriarch. That's New York. Boston was always Angelos, man. I remember the Angelos had 3 houses at the end of a cul-de-sac in Peabody, one of the sons. He owned all 3 houses. You couldn't pull down that street without 3 sedans pulling up behind you. We used to pick up his newspapers for recycling. But
Really?
everybody in Boston knew the Angelos ran the North End.
Right.
It was all mobbed up. It was beautiful. You could get a decent slice of pizza in the North End because it was all Italian. You wouldn't dare sell pizza in the North End without it being authentic. And it was Whitey Bulger that came along.
Okay.
And ratted the Angelos out and gave them up to the feds. And you have to understand that the mob keeps a close tie on all the bad stuff that's going to happen in any city. I'm not pro mob in any way, but I grew up in a city where we had what was called the combat zone. So it was a block of businesses. It was strip clubs. It was you couldn't gamble at any time in Massachusetts until the 90s or whatever. But the combat zone is where you knew you could go and get a blowjob. You find a half a gram of cocaine. You could whatever you wanted to do. But that's where it stayed. Don't take it off that 3 blocks. Don't do it anywhere else, because the mob had a tight control of it. And so did the police. They knew where it happened. They knew when it happened. They busted it up, but, not as regularly as they would anywhere else. And you knew that's where you could go and be an idiot.
Didn't have to worry about getting in trouble.
And I have to tell you that when my father, brother, and I started robbing jewelry stores, and that's what we ended up doing. We ended up doing 22 jewelry stores in a 5-year period that I can remember. Now, I'm 54 now. So when I sat down to do my podcast, that's why I ended up having to call my dad in so he could start helping me remember some of the robberies. Because I was like, wait, it wasn't that I couldn't remember the robberies. I just couldn't remember the timeline because we were doing probably 3 a year. I felt like it was quarterly. My dad was such a businessman. He's like, once a quarter, we're gonna hit something. And it wasn't always a store. So when I say stores, you have to understand kind of the industry at the time, but we could not have done what we did if the Angelos had stayed in power. Whitey Bulger he didn't have a lot of control over the city, and he just let crews do whatever they wanted. And the Angelos would have come to us and said, hey, don't touch that jewelry store, or where the hell is our 90% gratuity? Like they take it all, man. They'll say, hey, we'll take your stolen goods, but we're giving you 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, you're getting nothing.
And what are you going to do?
Yeah, nothing. They got all this power behind them, man, and all these guys, all this, and they're known for what they were.
And it's organized muscle. So it's like they know who in the city is doing what. And then when you can't just roll up with a crew of a father and two sons and start doing what we did unless some of the order that the mob provided had dissolved.
Right.
And it did. It went to crap, man. If any of what you watch or look at with Whitey Bulger he was completely disorganized. He just loved chaos.
Right. Yeah.
And God bless him for that, man, because we wouldn't have been able to do what we did without somebody coming along and making it difficult for us to do it.
And so now that you've laid out the whole mob scene and everything about what was going on at that time, like, was your father, did he have any, or even you or your brother, any ties with the mob at all, or any
None
talks or
whatsoever.
anything?
None whatsoever.
Okay.
My dad grew up close to Heller's Bar, which was in Chelsea, Massachusetts. He had his mother and father had a house 2 doors down from Heller's Bar, which was a Angulo Bulger bar. So it was a Bulger and Angulo bar because it was set. You can only see the door outside of it. It has no distinctive marks, or doesn't look like a box. It's not Chili's.
No.
And right behind it was a huge parking lot just underneath the Tobin Bridge, leading out of Boston into the suburbs. And my dad regularly would see one of those tractor trailers just outside of Heller's Bar, unloading it and giving it to cops. They were giving it to pedestrians that would pull up. They were just selling it right out, just like you see in all the mob movies my dad will describe. Like, there were people that there were cars that don't touch. There were people that you didn't talk to, and you knew that neighborhood for whoever was hanging out in it, and you knew who to stay away from. And my dad knew that. And my dad was very upstanding. My dad was not mobbed up in any way. He wasn't a gangster. He went to Wentworth School of Technology. He was a smart dude. He was the only one in the family to go to college, and he got a scholarship to do so, and he did really well at college. So when he graduated, he was working really, really hard. The first, it's going to be 20 years of me actually being conscious of what my dad did and how he did it. He worked really hard. He traveled a lot, but he was really good at it, and he made a decent amount of money for back then. How did he snap is a really good question.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. What was the change?
There was always this side of my dad that you thought was innocent, but it was, I can get a good deal. I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And that was always in the realm of jewelry. My dad always knew the guy that owned the jewelry store because he introduced himself to him and could always claim to get so much money off of what you would pay retail. And it was just, you go to dad, just go to my dad. And he just loved it. He'll tell you until his dying day that he wished he was a jeweler, that he didn't want to necessarily be a salesman as much as he loved the idea of selling shiny things to people. He just glowed doing it. And the job that he had as a salesperson, where he met people in bars all the time, or he had to make connections, he had a huge network of people that he could also sell wholesale jewelry to. So he always had kind of people on the inside. And one day he met our co-defendant. And our co-defendant was part of I guess you would call it was part of the landscape at the time, because there was no Jared. There was no Hellsberg Jewelry that was one of the franchises out there. There was no Long Jewelers that was big on the Northeast. They were just mom and pop jewelry stores. You know them as you were growing up. Hey, where do you go and get jewelry? Well, go down to this store, and you don't remember the name necessarily unless it was a Jared, and you just didn't see that back then. Right. And jewelry salesmen would drive around and try to sell like anybody to some of these mom and pops little stores. And those are the people. That was our co-defendant. That's what he did. So he had one of 4 companies in the country that would import and export jewelry at the time, because that's hard to do, and we don't make it. We don't mine a lot of that stuff out of this country, so we have to import it and export it in and out of here, and bringing it in is not easy. So there were only 4 companies that I knew of at the time that was doing it, and one of it was called Citra, and Citra had just a huge catalog. So if you had a Citra catalog, it was a catalog of rope chains, Figaro chains, link chains, collateral, everything you could possibly imagine in the jewelry world is a catalog. And you would say, hey, I'm opening a jewelry store. I need 50 of these. I need 70 of these. I need, you were building an inventory, which is really hard to do if you're opening a jewelry store. You have to have a good relationship with those people. And that's what my co-defendant did. And that's one of the people that my dad ended up getting good deals from. And they knew everybody in the industry that was capable of bringing stuff into the country. And one guy was saying, hey, I'm going to buy a bunch of diamonds from Israel. At the time, you could only buy diamonds from Israel. So De Beers was the only monopoly on the planet that controlled every diamond mine anywhere. They were like the biggest mob. If you think of the Italian mob, De Beers was huge. They ran a conglomerate of thugs that just thumped you as soon as you discovered a diamond mine. So all diamonds went into Israel, and they were cut there, they were graded there, and you could buy for $800,000 a box of them. And in that $800,000 box, there was a varied quality of diamonds. If you had a great relationship with them, you got good diamonds. If they didn't like you, you would struggle. You want to get rid of your inventory. You could have a jewelry store full of stuff, right. But selling it's a different thing.
Oh yeah.
So to bring diamonds in, you had to go through this company in Israel. And this guy said to my dad, I'm bringing this huge lot of diamonds in. Would you invest? And everybody that in that circle invested in it. And my dad was one of them. So my dad apparently was ripped off by this guy and wanted to go after him. So
how did he get robbed? Just the guy didn't pay him back?
I just didn't. Yeah, everybody invested all of this money so this guy could bring these diamonds into the country. And this guy was like, it didn't happen, but everybody knew it did.
Wow.
So my dad was just outraged. He was just outraged. And at first he had just employed my brother's help. I'm little. I'm only 150 pounds. So my brother just a mass of muscle. Both my father and my brother are big, big guys. And he was just asking my brother to go wait behind this guy's house so we could set him up in a way that when he came home, my brother would go after him. But I didn't know anything about it until a couple of days before Christmas. My brother had made 2 or 3 attempts to do it by himself, but he couldn't. He's like, I need Bri. So they drove home one night, and I'm laying on the couch, and it was almost like I knew, because my dad's like, I'm like, where are you guys going at 8 o'clock at night? And my dad's like, Kev's helping me do some filing at the office. And I'm like, my brother's doing filing? What do you mean? Carrying around the files from room to room? Because that's all he's good for. He ain't filing shit. And I don't know, there was just something about it that was kind of, it seemed like bullshit to me. And they came home and they said, hey, this is what's going on. And my dad was very sincere about it. And my dad was always very calm, cool, and collected. And to see him in a place that was panicky, almost kind of desperate, and he was pissed. And he's like, would you help? And I said, absolutely. That's one of the things that when I think back on, I was like, I wish I took more time to kick that around.
Yeah, and think about it a little more.
I really wish I was like, okay, hold on. I need some charts. I need some graphs. Where's the construction paper? Because I just remembered having such an allegiance and such a loyalty to my old man and my brother that I just instantly said yes. And I'm sorry, from the second it happened, I was like, wow, that's pretty fucking cool. Somebody fucked with us, and my dad's willing to go after him. And I think that more than anything else is what my dad left where he grew up, that attitude of, it wasn't tied down, so we took it, but you took my stuff, fuck you, I'm coming after you. You know what I mean? It's just backwards ass, not right, but it was a code, I guess. And
so you ended up going with them, and how was this your first one? How did it go down?
The plan was to stand behind this guy's house, and this guy had a house that was separate from the garage. And we were going to stand on it was the right side wall. We're going to stand there because his house was, if you looked around the wall, his back door was right over to the left. So we were going to paste ourselves against that wall and just sit and wait for him to pull up because he had a motion camera. So a lot of people say, how do I stay safe? Well, you want to have a motion detective camera to detect other stuff, but you don't want it to light up your presence going into the house. You know what I mean? If I'm a burglar, I'm like, oh, there he is. Okay, he's got the stuff. So a lot of people ask me how to stay safe. Well, first is to always stay unpredictable. We're pasted against this guy's wall, and I'm just surprised none of his neighbors looked out their back door and said, Jesus, what are these two guys? Because it was a stark white wall in the middle of winter with a full moon out, lighting us up, and we were in all black.
Yeah, pretty obvious if someone were to look out there, you know.
We stuck out like sore thumbs with sore thumbs. And it was set up so beautifully because we used our co-defendant, who was somebody else in the industry, who had invested money with this guy, who was just supposed to accept that this guy was lying to everybody. But he still needed orders for Christmas. So our co-defendant called this guy and said, hey, I need about 50 grand worth of stuff, which we knew would be in this guy's case when he pulled up. So we knew something was going to be in there, because you don't want to do this to somebody and run away and open up and there's a tissue box in there. Not like there's an amount of money that you could walk away with and be, hey, it was okay what we did to that guy. But the plan was to just have my brother go after him, grab him, start hitting him so I could grab the case and we could just get the hell out of it. And that's what we did.
And so, I mean, after you did that, what was the reaction between you, your dad, and your brother, or and your co-defendant?
When my dad was across the street in a stolen car. So in every single robbery, we always had a stolen car. And it was usually a car that we had rented a couple of weeks before. And my dad just made a key for. And so we would go on the lot the night before, take that car off the lot, use it in the robbery the next day, and hopefully either dump it or return it to the lot before anyone knew what was going on. This is a different world for rental cars. And now I would like to think we had something to do with the fact that they keep them behind fences and shit now.
Yeah, probably
our fault. Sorry. You just go in there and do that. But back then it was really, really easy, especially in southern New Hampshire, which is where my dad lived. And he was across the street of a highway that was divided by there was a guardrail in the middle of it. So we wanted that because we knew if he was on that side, nobody could get in their car and chase us until they went the other way and turned around. So we had it planned out so we could get out of there pretty quick. And my dad was on the other side of that road. So I had the case. I'm faster than my brother, so I bolted across it. And I would like to say I hurdled over those guardrails. I don't know. I might have tripped once or twice, but then I got in back of that car. My brother got in the front seat. I got in the back. And the plan was to always put me in a different car very close by and have me leave. So if my dad and brother got caught, if the cops had responded or anybody in the house had called, I would still have the stuff. And that's what we did. We split apart. And but before that happened, I jumped in the car and my dad said, you know, I love you guys very much. And that was it.
And that was it.
Yeah, that was huge. Well, it was huge for me to hear because it wasn't that my dad didn't say it. It was just that it was a couple of days before Christmas, so I thought we had saved Christmas, and it was just never seeing my dad, who had always been so calm, cool, and collected, that emotional about what we had done. And I would like to liken that to that's when he snapped. That's when we started doing this all over the place. But when all this was said and done, when everything was done, all 22 robberies were done, and we were all sitting in prison, and my brother and I lawyered up, it was then that we found out that my dad had done a robbery prior to us ever being involved in that first robbery.
So he did do one then.
And we didn't know, man. We had no idea. And it was prior to us getting involved. And the reason we were involved is because that first robbery failed.
Oh,
so
okay.
It was almost the same setup. My dad said he was going to dress as a security guard, and you can hear this on my podcast. I do an episode with my dad describing it, saying that they set this guy up to come to a store in a mall that was a jewelry store, and they were going to sell to him. And this guy was supposed to have a suitcase full of stuff. And my dad walked up to him dressed as a security guard. I have no idea what that means, because you got to understand that was back in the early 90s. You couldn't just find a security outfit somewhere or anything that looked my dad probably was just dressed in black and thought he looked like a security guard, but he maced the guy. He maced him right in the face. The guy falls on his case, and my dad couldn't pull it out from under him. So my dad ran away, and it was failed. And when he drove away, he said, "You know what? I need help." And for his second, which was our first, he pulled us in. Yeah. And he'll tell you on the podcast he did it because who else can you trust but your son?
Yeah. Well, what about the next few that it led to? Like,
the next one is one that we walked away from, but somebody died.
Really?
Yeah. The next one was presented to us the same way. So after that first case that we got, there was a lot of money in there. There was a lot of loose diamonds. It was something I had never seen before. It was like owning a jewelry store in one case. And we came back for spring break that year of 91 from we were going to Plymouth State College at the time. And my dad says, "Hey, I have another scenario for us." He said, the same people were ripped off by this guy that owns a store in Seabrook, New Hampshire. And they just want us to go in and take the guy down and rob the place. But they just want the $50,000 that's in his safe. So if we go in, they just want that, and we can take the rest of the store. And we were like, okay. It was dad asking again. It was such a Robin Hood type of narrative. It was like, "Hey, we're gonna go help somebody else that did the same thing I did." And we were like, all right, because we were living in the lap of luxury after that first one. It was like, boom. It was like it's getting that hit. It was getting that hit of, wow, I've never held this much money in my life. I've never held this many diamonds in my life, and these are ours now. You know what? Wow, can I tell you, I've never done any drug that gave me that same feeling, because it's a feeling of future safety. You know what I mean? Future ability to do whatever the hell you want in life. We didn't grow up with a ton of money. My dad might have been middle class, but we didn't grow up middle class. He did.
A little different.
Yeah, I was still in secondhand shit, and he certainly didn't skimp on his lifestyle to give us a meal. I'm not going to say he did bad by us in any way, but pulling us into this was my dad saying, "Wow, my dad in that first robbery made what he probably wasn't looking at making in a lifetime."
Yeah, that's true.
And boom, it's over. It was just over, and we went after somebody we thought was dirty, and my brother and I were romanticized by that. You know what I mean? And it was the day before this robbery that the first question of morality comes up, and it was from my brother. My brother was like, "Brian, are we bad people for doing this?" And I was like, "Wow, this guy ripped people off." But by definition, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can't argue with the science here, Kevin. If you're going to bring up excellent points, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Yeah. Okay.
But we cased this guy for 2 weeks. We watched his habits. We watched exactly what the store was like. We watched. It was a kind of a lesson for us on how to figure out what is the best time to go into a store and do what we were going to try to do. We got to subdue the guy. We got to drag him in the back, and we got to handcuff him to something. And again, this is back in the 90s. You could not order handcuffs off the internet. There was none. So me and my brother spent time figuring out, where the hell do you get a set of handcuffs? Because the best you could do was getting it in an old costume, and they were plastic.
Yeah.
We found them in a porn store.
Oh, of course. They got them.
Yeah. Oh, dude. And they had pink frilly on them. So, before we go into this whole thing, my brother's got handcuffs that have pink frilly lace on them because we couldn't pull it off. They were glued on. And it was just the idea of handcuffing this guy to something, and these
like that
just felt humiliating. But that was the plan. We were going to go in. We were going to bring the guy into the back. We were just going to handcuff him to the sink that was in the back that we knew was there. And we were going to clean out all of the cases. And that was my job. My brother was just to make sure the guy didn't cause any trouble, and we knew the guy had a gun. We watched him go in every day with the gun, but we knew he took it off when he opened the store. But when he saw us pull up, he kept it on. So and we nailed it. We walked into that store. We had every intention of doing. We had a plan. We had everything in place. All three of us walked in, and we were going to walk out after executing that plan. But we walked away when the guy showed up. He had a 45 under his arm. I mean, he was just he's sitting like this. It was a cannon, and none of us felt comfortable exchanging gunfire because my dad at that point was the only one that was armed.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had it, we thought, for safety. And we walked away from that. And a week later, his brother, his best friend walked in and shot him in the head and took the whole store down. And
So
did
he knew
exactly what these people asked us to do, because he was caught with $50,000 in a duffel bag, all of the jewelry from the store. He was really, really dumb about it. I have newspaper articles about his trial. He's doing life in Concord State Prison right now. But after that robbery, after the one that we walked away from, and then his friend goes in and executes the same plan we were going to execute, which means somebody outside of us was asking people to go in there and hit this guy. Things got easy for us and difficult. Everybody had to be armed, but at the same time, people were afraid. And again, besides Bulger taking over and all that mob bullshit, that was another piece of the pie that Burlington was probably our biggest robbery ever. And this was the first place that we got to control every aspect of every environment. My dad found a storefront. We rented it with cash, with no name. I don't know how he pulled that off, but it was in this little strip mall in Burlington, Massachusetts. And we set up a guy that was going to come and provide us with all the jewelry store for the whole store. We were promising this guy he was going to make a ton of money on us because he was going to be our sole provider of jewelry. And when we got him in that store, we duct taped him to a chair, got into his car, took out all of the car contents, and we took off. And that was the third robbery, but the second robbery that me and my brother were involved in, and it was huge. It was just huge in terms of yield.
How much would you say you guys made, or even?
The first one, I would say 250 grand. This one was easily 500. And if you waited long enough, and again, one of the things that the insider interview really, they just wanted to know what were the pennies on the dollar you were getting. So okay, let's just say somebody comes up to you and says, boom, here's an entire store inventory worth of stuff that's hot.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck.
Good luck.
You know what I mean? Because now you have this pile of jewelry, and now a cop has a file saying this jewelry is looking to be dumped somewhere. And that's why I say the jewelers would have come in and say, hey, you can get rid of this with us, but it's pennies on the dollar because we're assuming 90% of the risk trying to dump this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So to get what we were getting out of this, we were trying to sell it ourselves. So we were having like Tupperware parties. We were having like jewelry parties.
Well, I was going to say another key point going on between, throughout your whole career and stuff as a burglar or a jewelry thief and stuff was like the drugs and stuff that you started to form like a habit with drugs, and like a lot of your money would go to that. And so what, in the beginning, it was just, just having a fun time, but then kind of towards the middle of it changed to, doing it heavy, would you say, or?
Well, just prior to.
Prior, oh, okay.
Both of us, both my brother and I had we were weak-willed because of the promise of the cash. The promise of the cash meant we could be high all the time. My brother and I left adolescence both addicts. So this skyrocketed our use. It certainly didn't cause it. We just certainly didn't get into drugs because of it. We were already heavily into it. Beyond, my brother was one of the first people to sell steroids in my high school. So it was really early on. This was a dysfunctional home. My dad left when we were really early. My mother was an alcoholic. Nothing good came out of our childhood. I wish I could say it was happy. It just wasn't. It was turmoil. My dad wasn't around. He was traveling all the time. And his parenting was a check to a woman who, parted her brains out with it.
Yeah.
So it's always part of the backdrop. It's always part of the backdrop, always part of the landscape.
Well, after a couple of the robberies and heists you did, you ended up going to treatment for a little bit, getting out. and then going back to it, right? Right back to the drugs and the heist and stuff again.
There was my first attempt at getting sober was just a lark to get out of trouble with my dad. I thought he was going to kill me because
Really?
I had fenced so much stolen stuff in pawn shops
Mhm.
that it could have busted us. It really it put us at risk. So in the middle of it, I decided, hey, I got to stop this because clearly I don't want to put the entire family in jeopardy. So I told
Right.
my dad, hey, I have a drug problem, and his idea was to send me back to college. Get sober back in college.
Oh, yeah, party environment too there.
Right. So it was like a day that I was back, right back where I started. But it was probably a year after that, maybe even sooner, that it was my decision where I was
Mhm.
like, listen, if I'm gonna ever stay sober, I have to stop doing robberies. Sounds like part of the plan, or should sound like part of the plan.
Right.
So I moved in with my mother and I started going to school. So one of my degrees is in substance abuse counseling. I took one of the most difficult. It was a master's degree adapted to an associate's degree, and I jumped in head first with this, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But halfway through my curriculum, I got arrested.
Yeah, and that was when after you had done a couple more heists, and then the
Uh,
police really started to pursue you and your dad, your brother, and all that. And
uh,
what what was the heist prior that really got the cops' attention on you guys?
I
Which
would
one?
say there was a robbery. I think it was the Littleton robbery, which after that there was a composite drawing of my dad. And the
Oh, that's right.
composite drawing of my dad was spot on, man. This guy, whoever drew it, kudos, man. I have a copy of it. It's on I think it's one of the covers of one of my podcast episodes.
Yeah, you sent it to me too.
Yeah, I sent it to you. So by all means, pop that up because
Yeah.
and you have the picture of my dad. I mean, put them right next to each other, and it's like, holy crap! My dad laughed so heartily at the idea that what didn't look like him at all. And when he slid it across the table at me, we were in a 99 restaurant. Oh my god! And he slides it across, and I'm like, we're doomed. We're done. I'm like,
Yeah.
if people are looking at this and then see you anywhere, we're done. And he kept
Mhm.
going. And then we did the Littleton robbery, we did the Raynham robbery, we did the Methuen robbery, and these were just like snatch and grabs. Now they didn't have any, I don't know, class or panache. It didn't take much planning. It was just go in and get the hell out and grab whatever you can. In some cases, the Littleton robbery, we just robbed a guy in a parking lot and took his car. It was a carjacking. So it just
And
started getting sloppy. We weren't getting much yield, and then the hammer came down. They came and they got my dad.
so when they came and they first went to you looking for your brother, right? And then they tried to get your dad, or how did it go down?
Wow. No, they ended up getting one of our co-defendants. So one of the problems after the second robbery where that guy died, where everybody was super cautious, you couldn't just call somebody and say, hey, come to our store. We want to fill our entire store with your inventory if you were a male. They'd be like, yeah, sure, click. You'd never see him. So we would employ women to call these guys and kind of get them to feel comfortable. So a couple of our co-defendants were women. One of them was my dad's girlfriend. She turned state's evidence on me. So I was only charged with the Burlington robbery, the one that we taped the guy to the chair, because that's the only one where an eyewitness to the robbery could put me there. All the others it was circumstantial evidence. So they started putting me in lineups left and right. And my God, if you've never done a lineup, don't.
Don't
And
do it.
they're just they're very, very stressful. All of this is lineup. This gray hair, man, it just took the life out of me. It was and especially when you're guilty as fuck, man. You're so guilty, and you're standing there like, what am I supposed to do here? What am I not supposed to do? It almost drives you crazy enough to start confessing.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so I was sober during all of it too, and it was because it meant something to me at that point. You can
yeah.
get sober because there's a lot of people barking at you to do it. But you can get sober because it means something to you, and there's something about it that you see value in. And once that happens, It's not that hard to do. I know so many people white knuckle it and probably punch me right in the neck for saying that. But I don't know. For me, it's always been a behavioral issue.
Yeah.
More than it's ever been a disease that I think if one drink touches my lips, I'm gonna go off the rocker, or you know what I mean. I that's what my second degree was about. My first degree, I got that degree in substance abuse counseling, so I could study it. I could understand all of the different models that might fall under addiction, and how mental health views addiction, and how AA views addiction, and the disease model is not part of necessarily the mental aspect of what addiction is about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
from there, it was, hey, I'm off to prison. I'm going away.
So they identified you. They after she went state's evidence, then that was all they needed,
well,
right?
That's what they had. So that's what they indicted me for. So they're going to go in front of a grand jury and say, hey, grand jury, here's somebody that was in that robbery. She was part of it. And she says Bryan was there. Do we have enough evidence to go get him and bring him down here and answer the charges for that? And the grand jury was like, yep, there you go. Send him. And they came and they grabbed me. So from there, they're going to start the process of, hey, we also have some information that you're part of all of this shit. So let's start seeing if we can put that together. So I didn't have to do the lineups. I could have said no.
Yeah.
I don't want to go in front of a jury and be like, I was busy that, you know what I mean? And, this is all when you think about when it's explained to a jury, you're like, oh yeah, this is absolute bullshit. Right. So they were just trying to see how much they could tag on me, rightfully so. I appreciate the law. I appreciate what it does. You will never walk away from, I hope anyone ever never walks away from prison saying, I'd go back to that.
Yeah, right. And that'd be the terrible mindset. Like,
no way. I still have nightmares that they're either coming, that my freedom's being taken away, that I'm going back to prison for something that I did in a dream that I didn't, it wasn't because I wanted to do it. I'm in the dream like I had already done it. And I'm like, oh my God, they're going to come and get me. And it's just vicious. It stays with me for days because it's like prison worked on me. It worked. I'm good.
Well, when you ended up going to court, you were found guilty, and then
I didn't go to trial, man. I pled out. Me and my brother pled out. No, you don't go to court with this. 99% of these cases are pled out. No one goes to trial. No one. When you're indicted by a grand jury, it's like, let's sit in front of 12 normal people and hear what we have or what we think about this person, and it's usually spot on the money. So
right. So what do they call it then? You just went to speak with a lawyer and the other defense lawyer, or what was it like?
So the process right after they indict you is, can you get out? So they're going to set bail. Okay. Right? Everyone's going to have bail set in 24 hours. So during my bail trial, they set my bail at $5 million.
Yeah. that's what is that, $500,000 you got to pay?
$500,000 cash. But I'm sitting there, and you have to be represented. So it's not like if you know ahead of time that you're going down. I had no idea when they were going to bring me from New Hampshire down to Massachusetts. And I wasn't legally represented at that point. But you cannot have bail assigned to you without legal representation. So they always have a court-appointed lawyer there just to stand there and make sure you are represented. So he came up to me. I'm in the jury box. I'm shackled. He's like, okay, here's what's going to happen. They're going to come in. This guy's going to say a bunch of nasty things about you. And I'm just here to make sure everything goes fine. And you can go get your lawyer after this. And I was like, okay. And I don't know what this guy was expecting because he's holding his clipboard. And when the judge says $5 million, he drops his clipboard. He's like, what? He's like, John Dillinger's bail wasn't that much. He's like, how many babies did you eat? He's flipping through this like he missed some part of the case. But they were just making a point. They were making a point, man. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire were all pissed because we ran rampant around both of those states for a very long time. And they weren't happy about us at all.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. And then after, obviously, you didn't get out on bail on that, right?
I did, man. I ended up going in, and I had, because I was going to school at the time, I had both the hospital that I was working for. I was hired as a mental health counselor while I was still in school. I mean, I was good at this, man. I take pride. I was good at finding out why you were fucked up. And this is why I'm going to tell you right now, there should be all inmate juries. If there were all inmate juries, that trial would be over in 45 seconds. As soon as that inmate talked, they'd be like, yeah, he did it. Here's how he did it. This is what happened. Stop lying. Get out of here. You know you did it. Go away. Because right now, you need the criminal mind to figure out whether or not you go into any prison and you're going to sit there and try to pretend like none of what they're accusing you of is true, but the inmates all know. They all know. There's nobody innocent in that room, or it's very unlikely that you're innocent in that room. So once we got a lawyer, the lawyer got my bail down to $250,000, and my grandmother put up her house for $25,000, but only because I wanted to finish that degree. Oh. So that substance abuse counseling degree, my professor was just amazingly gracious. He actually counted my prison as internship time. It's like social work.
I guess to some degree it'll work.
And it was just great. The guy just really believed in me, and that type of like psychology stuff, I could just sit and listen to. I didn't have to take notes for. I could take a test and ace it. It was the same brain my dad had, and it was the same brain my brother had. I think there's so many kids now that are just understimulated by this insistence that you're going to sit and just learn with the herd, that there are some of them that need more than that. You know what I mean? And I was certainly one of them. You could not keep me calm. You still can't keep me calm. I've never settled. I never sit still. So, that becomes a problem for society if you don't do something with it.
Yeah, well, so you ended up getting some prison time. So how many years did you get?
I got 3 years in prison, mostly because of the sentencing guidelines at the time were very strict about, if it's a felony and it's a violent felony, they don't want you to do county time, which is why inmates will constantly make a distinction between prison and jail. Prison is where you're doing a certain amount of time and you're with a certain caliber of criminal. And then county is where all the punks are. We call them punk bids. So I got just over 3 years because of it, but I ended up doing about 2.5 because I was sentenced under one guideline, but I did the crime while the law was another guideline. So they had to grandfather some stuff in. So they took a little bit of time off my sentence, but my father and brother got hit way harder than I did because there was way more proof against them. My dad did 12 years in prison because they charged him for 6 armed robberies that they knew he was involved in. My brother was 8 years. My brother ended up doing 10 because once he did 8, he was on probation for another 3, and he was out for like a year, and he decided probation wasn't for him. And that's something a hardened con will often do. We call it just they're just going to do their time, man. They're just going to wait for their date to be up. And they won't go out on probation or parole. They'll just be like, no, I'm just going to wrap up. And wrapping up is them saying, when I leave here, you're not going to have any strings attached to me. And that's what my brother, I think, where he was at after 8 years. So he's like, oh, I'll go back for another 2. No problem.
No. For you, that was not your case at all. Like,
no, man, I did my 2.5, and I'm like, I am out of here. I don't jaywalk. I'm not. Nope, I'm not. I ain't playing.
Well, yeah. So with your time in prison, it was, I mean, from the book that I read, it looks like you got to reconnect with your father for a little bit and your brother as well, even though you weren't supposed to associate at all, right? Like you guys are.
You can get permission to visit your family. I was on probation, and because it's an extenuating circumstance, they don't deal with that a lot. There's not a lot of families hanging out in prisons. Like I remember once me and my brother were sentenced, and we both pled out on the same day, and they brought us to prison. And him and my brother and I are one con number apart. I remember my con number, and I'll remember my con number till the day that I die. W61095. I'll die with it. It's like my social security number, and he was W61094. And we went in together, and you go right in Concord, you go right into the J buildings, which is kind of an orientation block. From there, you're supposed to see the class board. And the class board is you sit in front of 3 prison officials that decide what level of security, based on your crime, you need moving forward. So the first prison we were in was only supposed to be there for like 48 hours before they shipped you off based on your crime. I was in that prison for close to a year because of the overcrowding problem in Massachusetts at the time. And so was my brother. So once I was moved out of that orientation block and put into an older part of the prison, a bed opened up next to me, it's in the cell next to me. And you can go up to the assignment officer at lunch in prison and say, hey, can you move me to this cell or move me to that cell or blah, blah, blah. And I asked him to move my brother in there. And he said, get the fuck away from me. It's not like they're not customer service. Hello, prisoner, what would you like? No,
hell no.
The sun is too much on you today. Well, let's see if we can get you into cooler quarters.
No way. No, man.
So the guy was just completely dismissive of it. And then I'm like, shit. And I go back to my cell and they tell us to lock the doors. And I'm laying there. And all of a sudden, my brother's fat face is in the window. They put him in the cell next to me. And then when my dad got there, my dad was like it was just a Don Juan of prison. Like my dad instantly walked into prison with a job. He was right into the kitchen. So you eat like a king. You're in a part of the prison that's dormitory style. So you're not locked in a cell with somebody you don't know who's somebody. It's just a scumbag. I'm sorry. We're all scumbags. Everyone in prison is a scumbag. There's no good people there. Cut it out. And having a cellmate is one of the worst experiences. Forget about hey, you're going to get fucked in prison. It's whose shit do I have to smell? This guy's going to be pissing and I don't even know if I can swear on this thing.
No, yeah, you can. No problem. No problem. Go ahead.
I don't care because I've been doing it since we started.
I know. Yeah, I know.
No, man, and it becomes a real problem because there's so many sex offenders in prison that they can't put in protective custody because everyone thinks that these people end up getting protective custody because you can't put them in population. But there's so many of them that you can't, and being put in protective custody is for the really bad ones, man. I remember Father Gagan being one of the people that was in protective custody, and he raped millions of kids in the Catholic Church. And those are the people who are like, no way he's going into population, because just taking him down, you get massive street cred or prison cred. But then there's just a whole bunch of guys that, anywhere from somebody that pissed outside and the cop wanted to just, that's a sex offense. You take a piss outside now and find out what happens when the cop pulls up. To, just being a shitbag. But they were amongst the general population. And now let's say that guy comes into my cell and the rest of the inmates know what he did. I got to get him out. I'm guilty by association with that person. So it's very stressful, guys. Stay out of prison.
No kidding, man. So when you got out of prison, we were on to doing great things. You were done with that. You were just so over being involved with crime and everything. So kind of explain what you did when you got out.
I went right back into school. I took prison as an opportunity to use the 3 years to get 3 years worth of reading done. I went to the prison library every day. I had both my professor and people from work sending me books that were part of curriculums of psychology degrees. I read everything Freud's done. I've read everything Anna Freud has done. I've read everything Jung has done, but Carl Jung is just so confusing. The guy is just on another planet. But I just took it as an opportunity. Is I'm not going to sit here. And it wasn't because I wanted to learn, dude. It was because how the fuck do I make sure this doesn't happen again? Like when am I going to touch upon what I have? Which one of these mental disorders explains what I did? Because I just ended up very confused and very angry the entire time I was in prison at my dad, mostly because I knew I would never have done that on my own. That wasn't a path I was on. I was in college. I'm not saying I was good at it. I was an addict. I was a great addict. But, that was starting to dry up for us. Both me and my brother, that opportunity was drying up. And the robberies just added water to it. So I was really angry with him, and it took me a long time. My second psych degree was in counseling, and again, I only took it because I wanted to figure out my own stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to go to doctorate. I wanted to have a doctorate in psychology, but my felony stopped me. They stopped me, and they've stopped me from doing a lot of cool things. They really have. And I am in fitness now and have been in fitness since I left prison. I spent a lifetime in fitness because my felonies still make it difficult for me to do a lot of things. So I've had two business opportunities in my life to do something with really, really big security companies. Not a chance once they enter my social security number into any database. These are people that have access to everything in the world, and you can have your record sealed and you can try to hide it. I put it out there. I try to make people understand that this is a problem. We have a lot of ex-cons in this country, and we're going to continue to have a lot of ex-cons in this country. So what you're making, you're bringing light to is the idea that in your community there's more than one. And these people are stymied by, a limited number of choices. Right now you can do anything you want. Once you get out of prison, you can do 4 things. And that's it, man. And personal training was one of them. So I worked very, very hard to make sure that at no point anyone would ever look at me and think that I was up to anything that was no good. That was my attitude out of prison. And now it's very, very different. I started using the story after I wrote the book to talk to high schools who are all dying. Kids are dying to hear dramatic examples and hear about accountability, and they're dying to hear about standing up to and saying, hey, I came back from, and I dug my way out of. That's the stuff that they want to hear. That's the stuff that they need to hear. I did 16 schools the first year the book was out. People were calling me like, come on. Some of them would pay me because they had money in the budget, and that was fine because it wasn't expense for me to take off work, man. I still had rent.
Yeah, of course.
But it started to become such a cool thing because so many people were like, please come and tell a story that we can, even if a teacher had done what I had done, and there's no way they would have been a teacher. They still can't bring that up to the students. There's still this, you have to keep this barrier between you and your students. And if your student says, hey, I have an alcohol problem, you can't be like, I wasn't drunk for 20 years. Because that's not, you don't want the students to know that. So they really want somebody to come in and be able to open that dialogue. And now the teachers can start saying, well, when Bryan said this, do you think that's true? And boy, the kids loved me because the kids can tell when you're full of shit in 2 seconds.
Of course.
They should have all kid or all inmate juries, because the kid will be like, no way, I don't know what that dude did, but he's full of shit, or that they just know. Kids are like, they're like dogs, man. They know who's good and who's bad, man. It's an evolutionary, like, I got to know who's safe and who isn't. And kids are really great at that. And they just have always opened up to me, and they've always loved the story. They've always been really cool with their questions. I loved it. And I wish I could do more of it. And I'm hoping to get back to more of that. But, working full time's hard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course, man. So, and you just came out with your book and the podcast. So, I mean, you've done a lot of good things since you've been out, man. So I'm glad you're sticking to it and staying with it and just really trying to stay dedicated and just redeem your name of all things. Like,
stand-up comedy has been fun. That's one of the things I globbed onto too. So, anybody out there looking for a challenge, stand-up comedy's hard. Every single city has a class somewhere. Go to an improv somewhere and take a stand-up comedy class, because it's a good way to sort of get stuff out. And that's what I started doing too. So to promote the book, I was doing stand-up. I still do stand-up. I love it. And it's a way to get up and tell a story and try to make light of just a shitty story.
Right. Very good. It's like helps to you have like this very healthy outlet,
Try to, I don't want to die without doing something with this that was worthwhile. So I would very much like to see Ben Affleck try to play me in the movie. I always had big hopes that it just sounds like a Hollywood movie to me.
It does.
But at the same time, I wrote the book to try to use it as a tool. Not that I thought a lot of kids were on that path, but it's a lot of people are just saying, hey, can you come back from shit?
Absolutely.
And that's just the message is I came back from it. You could have a decent life. It's difficult. It's a struggle. But who doesn't have that? I don't want anyone to be like, well, poor Bri, because I wreaked havoc.
Yeah.
Over, and I made a lot of people's lives. I scarred a lot of people, and So none of what I'm talking about is I'm trying to glorify in any way. So when I was on America's Most Wanted, before the cameras rolled, I was in the back. I don't even think they knew I was backstage yet. And I heard the director say, "He's not coming on here to tell everybody how to do it right."
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, and that's not what I wanted either. I just wanted to get on and be like, hey, this is just a crazy story. And if people want to hear it and try to use it in some way to reach out to somebody.
Yeah, it can go a long way, man.
I'm all right with it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Bryan, and sharing your story today, man. I'll put your book and your podcast and anything else you want me to put in the video description, man. But any final words?
Oh, man, I don't know, man. Do the right thing.
Bryan has an incredible redemption story. He is very lucky to only had served a few years in prison for all the robberies he did. He is now doing great things since he's been free. Please check out his book and his podcast. I'll be sure to put those in the video description below. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview with Bryan. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Also, please don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this interview today. Please be sure to hit the notification button if you want to get notified each time I drop a podcast. I did also record a bonus clip with Bryan. You can sign up for the new Invest in Yourself podcast membership. It's $5 a month. All you got to do is just go to the video description below and click the link and become a member. You'll get early access to interviews before everyone else, and on top of that, some bonus clips and some additional other stuff. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one.